Among the pleasure seekers and the interminably curious of the Eldari were those whose pursuit of excess became ever more extreme. These included a great proportion of the aristocracy of ancient Eldari society who possessed the wealth and time to truly explore the meanings of decadence. One by one, the leaders of the pleasure cults that were becoming the centerpiece of Eldari society became obsessed with their own power and gratification. They relocated their headquarters to the labyrinth dimension known as the Eldari Webway, for so great was their political influence that they could command the construction of entire extra-dimensional sub-realms just for themselves. Unseen, these pleasure cult lords continued to grow in power and influence, initiating more and more of the ancient Eldari population into their strange and shadowy creed of decadence. The Eldari are the most psychically gifted of all sentient beings in the galaxy, and as the hedonistic corruption gradually seduced them, the echoes of their ecstasy and agony began to ripple through time and space. In the parallel dimension of the Imperium, the warp, the reflections of these intense experiences began to coalesce. As the shifting tides of the chaotic Empyrean can take form around the raw emotions emitted by the sentient beings of the material universe and attract even more of such similar psychic energies to themselves. The constant stream of individual selfishness and indulgence pouring into the warp from the Eldari Empire nourished and empowered that which lay within, a nascent god of pleasure and pain, content to wait and to grow. As the Eldari Empire sank into corruption, decadence, brother turned against brother in pursuit of ever more extreme and darker pleasures, some of the wiser Eldari foresaw the disaster that was approaching their society and fled from the core worlds to safety. The first of these were the Exodites, who chose to establish a network of Eldari planetary colonies known as the Maiden Worlds, far from the blighted heart of the Empire. Many of these still exist in the galaxy, their cultures living in a symbiotic relationship with the world spirits of the planets they call home and protect. Among the last Eldari to escape from the Empire's core before the fall were the ancestors of the present day's craft world Eldari. As their society collapsed into civilization-wide insanity, these Eldari recoiled in horror from what they were becoming. Realizing that they stood upon the brink of destruction, they bent their considerable resources to the construction of the massive craft worlds, the graceful, space-borne cities that were the size of small moons. These Eldari retreated into aestheticism and spiritual introspection, preserving what they could of their ancient ways and culture before the time of the pleasure cults. They left the core worlds of the Empire behind for the dubious safety of deep space, to the laughter and contempt of those who remained behind. Some even managed to flee far enough to escape the terrible destruction that was to come. Within the warp, the constant stream of indulgence and depravity pouring from the Eldari Empire became as unstoppable as a tide. It nourished and empowered that which crystallized at its center, a nascent god of excess and amoral pleasure-seeking. The long millennia of Eldari hedonism had made a massive impact in the psychic realm of chaos. Within the warp, the decadent Eldari civilization was giving shape to a new, major power of chaos, which grew and grew over thousands of Terran years, getting stronger and more defined until suddenly it sparked into a malevolent intelligence, a shatteringly huge and malign being with an immense and bottomless thirst for Eldari souls. This was the birth of the Chaos God Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Pleasure, better known as She Who Thirsts to the Eldari and all their descendants, for to them, Slaanesh was inherently female. This process of psychic gestation lasted for thousands of standard years, corresponding to the historical era that was mankind's age of technology and age of strife. Although, when Slaanesh finally came into being, the results within the material universe were apocalyptic and sudden. As depravity riddled every aspect of Eldari society, the pleasure cult sought ever more violent thrills. Before long, the streets of Eldari cities ran with their blood. The once elegant architecture of their palaces became battlegrounds as the Eldari preyed upon each other, reveling in the cruelest of crimes. Their insanity and tainted passions poured into the warp until it finally achieved critical mass. With an apocalyptic bellow that tore the heart out of the Eldari Empire, a new Chaos God was born, Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Excess. An almighty psychic shockwave skithed across the galaxy, destroying countless billions of Eldari souls as its birth cries echoed through the material realm. The souls of almost every Eldari were stripped from them in an instant and devoured by the newborn Chaos God in a cataclysm of pain and terror. There were few survivors. Most Eldari were driven mad, their minds trapped half in the real world and half in the swirling insanity of the warp. A great warp rift was created in the material universe at the site of what had once been the center of the Eldari civilization, encompassing almost the entire Eldari Empire and creating the Eye of Terror, thus marking the end of the era known to humanity as the Age of Strife. World after Eldari world had fallen into the warp, to later be known as the Crone Worlds. Slaanesh, meanwhile, gorged itself upon their horror and despair. Unstoppable in its ascendancy, the new god consumed the ancient deities of the Empire and scattered their psychic remains to the far corners of the Imperium. The Eldari civilization was gone. All that was left of their species were the exodites of the farthest flung maiden worlds, the craft-world Eldari who had travelled far enough to escape the aftershock of destruction caused by Slaanesh's birth and the formation of the Eye of Terror, and those adherents of the pleasure cults who were hidden in the sub-realms of the Webway. Much of the Webway was shattered into ruin by the fall, but unlike the craft-world Eldari who fled the catastrophe in real space, those Eldari who had built their own jealously guarded empires in the Webway remained physically unaffected by Slaanesh's birth. The echoes of the new god's apotheosis still resounded within them, but unlike their kin in real space, they had escaped destruction. In their arrogance, they did not end their quest for excess and decadent pleasure, not even for a momentary respite following the death of their empire. Repentance and atonement were meaningless concepts for a people that no longer acknowledged any limits on their actions, regardless of the consequences. The change that was wrought upon those Eldari sealed within the webway was far more subtle. Rather than having their psychic essences, their souls consumed in one great draught by Slaanesh, their souls slowly drained away into the warp, taken over time by she who thirsts. The Eldari hate and fear Slaanesh above all other things, for she was given life by their actions, and yet she waits hungrily to claim each and every one of them, now or later. Where the Eldari of the craft world learn to deny Slaanesh's hold upon them by using the mystical spirit stones, the infinity circuits, and the philosophies of the Asuriani path to safeguard their souls from consumption, the Eldari of the webway became exceptionally good at ensuring that other beings suffered in their place. As long as they steeped themselves in the most evil and savagely decadent acts, the Eldari of the webway found that the curse of Slaanesh upon their people could be avoided. The psychic energy generated by the suffering and agony of others nourished their diminished souls and kept them vital and strong, filling their spare frames with unnatural, robust energies. Assuming that they could feed regularly enough upon the miseries of other intelligent beings, these Eldari became psychically immune to the passage of time, earning a twisted form of immortality. And so it was that the Drukhari were born, a race of sadistic murderers and fiendish torturers who feed upon the suffering of others in order to prevent the slow death of their own immortal souls. 10,000 standard years later, in the 41st millennium of mankind, Slaanesh's thirst consumes them still. There truly is no escape, for the Drukhari have only exchanged a horrible but quick death for an eternity of infernal hunger and the infinite emptiness wrought by self-absorption and pure, amoral selfishness.